worst can be basically virtual enslavement, where our devices are controlling what we see and implicitly controlling what we do, and we lose our freedom of thought. We lose our freedom to have our political views in whatever spectrums we want them to be. So there's a real danger there. And because this technology is so much more powerful than television or the internet has been, I'd say it's another 10x more powerful.
What is the metaverse? It's a super hot concept right now. Investors are all over it. Mark Zuckerberg is fully bought in. Essentially, on one level, it's a battle between tech giants to own the dominant computing paradigm of the future. And maybe for all the rest of us, it's a battle about defining how we experience information, entertainment, socialization, work, and in some versions of the metaverse, virtually all of life itself. But what is it, and what will it be, or what could it be? And crucially, what is it not? Today, we're chatting with Avi Bar-Zeev, who helped build HoloLens for Microsoft, worked on AR cloud tech for Bing, also co-founded Keyhole, which became Google Earth, very cool tech, helped define Second Life's technology, and may have, and we'll ask, but maybe he can't say anything, may have worked with Apple on its rumored smart glasses. He now runs Reality Prime, his consulting company. Welcome, Avi.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, it is a real pleasure to have you here. Let's start right in the middle of it. What is the metaverse?
Well, it kind of depends on who you ask right now. There's a whole bunch of definitions. So to be short and complete, let's say there's maybe three different definitions, right? There's the original one, and then every article always mentions Neil Stephenson and Snow Crash. And that one I would describe as a place to escape dystopian reality, to go become someone else, anonymous. In fact, using your real name would actually probably get you killed in real life if you did. And I think it's the same in Ready Player One as well. You really want to
100%.
have it be a completely separate life from reality. And strangely, in both, there was a little bit of an AR component, but nobody ever used it, I guess, because reality sucked so much that why even care about AR, because you're all escaping to VR all the time. So that's definition one. That's the sort of the original one. And then there's a newer one that has come up, which is the sense of take all the information, all the virtual worlds out there, and stitch them together into some virtual universe that has galaxies and planets, at least metaphorically, if not literally. And people are working on this and trying to solve the ability to move between worlds, like existing worlds, like Roblox or Fortnite or wherever else you want to go. So you want to be able to move your avatars and your loot between them. But then for some reason, this particular definition also took on the idea that it overlays also on top of the real world, as if we're going to want all these fantasies to spill out into reality, which is really the only part that I have an issue with. And maybe we'll talk about that later. But there's a lot of things that could go wrong with that AR part. And so I have some concerns. And then there's a whole other definition, which is the really broad one, which is it's just the future internet, just like cyberspace was coined. It was a virtual world, but it really just became the internet, and most of it was just 2D. Most of it didn't have people. It had pictures of people, but no people. And maybe it's more decentralized now. It's more like what people are talking about with Web3. Maybe it's Web 3D, right? But it's more along those lines. And I think what we still have to solve is, how does it become private? How does it become a safe place, unlike the web today, where your data is scraped all the time and you're monetized all the time. How does this version become something that's private? And I would argue that maybe we don't even want to call that the metaverse anymore, because there's so much baggage with the other ones, that maybe we want to come up with a new name for this, because it is new, and it's more like what evolves naturally anyway. And yeah, it's been here for a while, but it keeps getting better. We keep solving problems. Hopefully we don't keep recreating the same problems. And 10 years from now, it's something it'll just exist around us. We may not even have a word for it. Just like we don't always refer to the web as a thing. It's just what we do. I'm going to
Yes.
go to a site and do something, and I'm going to go talk to somebody. You don't always talk about the technology that got you there, right?
Absolutely. The fish doesn't know it's in water. We're in an atmosphere and we don't even think about it. I want to understand which of those three definitions maybe aligns closest with where you think things are going, or how you think things should go, which could be two different things. But maybe let's go back to some of the things in your career. You helped invent HoloLens. What did that teach you?
Well, a lot of things. I mean, I think, certainly I could go into how to get a big project started inside a giant corporation. That's I could not do that myself. That I have to give a lot of credit to a lot of other people who made that happen, and I helped. But I think the thing I learned the most from it was some of the things not to do. Honestly, like um, you know, originally we were thinking we would be draping all these virtual worlds on top of reality and reskinning everything, and there's some great experiences like that. Like you could imagine a really cool music visualizer that makes your room come alive and everything moves and beats with the music. That might be great, but you don't want that all the time. Mostly you want AR to be fairly minimalistic. You want to introduce one or two new elements into the world, and hopefully these are things that enhance your experience. Augmented reality is really about augmenting people, augmenting your perception of the world. So if you give us too much stuff, we're going to be confused and we're going to be pulled out of reality. What we really want is something that helps us deal with the reality, helps us find the book, in the bookstore that we're looking for, helps us cook, or helps us have conversations in a way that feels more like face to face. So you and I don't have to talk over video, but we could feel like we're across the same table from each other, and we can make true eye contact instead of here. If I look at my camera, I can make eye contact, or if I look at your picture, it doesn't look like I'm making eye contact. We can fix that. So that's where it becomes really important, I think. Um, and also, I think, just to jump on that too, I think I learned early on, just because I had started this so long ago, doing 30 years ago, I learned early on the problems with VR, right? Like a lot of people get really excited and then they do it for a while and they're like, yeah, okay, there's some problems here. I just had that experience earlier than most people, and
Mhm,
I got to see what the limitations were, and why we really don't want to live full time. I think in a virtual world,
mhm.
really the value. Maybe you only learn this when you start to have a family and kids, and you start to value the things in real life around you. But I went through that transformation as well around the same time, and I'm like, well, I don't really want to escape from reality. I want to make reality better. I think there's a lot of things we need to do to make the world better, and that's where I want to put my focus.
Let's talk about AR, augmented reality, mixed reality for a little bit. I actually got seed funding for a company probably about 5 years ago in the AR cloud space. And I envision a future where everything would be plastered with augments and you would need filters. You would need to be able to accept some of those, the ones that you want. You would need to be able to reject the majority of them. Some would need to be sort of part of a consensus reality, maybe street signs, speed limits, important civic there's a sinkhole ahead, stop walking. um, and some would be others that you would subscribe to, and there might be, thinking of US politics in the last 4 years or so, there might be a Republican filter and there might be a Democrat filter and whatever, right? How do you see the future in augmented reality? Because it looks like the tech giants are racing for smart glasses. We are going to have something probably initially connected to this in our pocket for compute and storage and connectivity and stuff like that. But eventually, probably entirely on its own, that is going to mediate what we see. How do you look at that future? Do you shy away from that future? Do you see challenges, dangers there? Do you see great things in that future?
I see great things, but also see great dangers. And I think the key issue is who is building the future and how are they monetizing it, right? So I'm gonna assume that your startup had really great ideas on how to monetize as well, that maybe hopefully didn't rely on advertising. Because I think that what we've seen is that advertising, ads themselves aren't evil, right? They're just giving you information. Hopefully, maybe they're a little shy on facts and high on emotion, but but individually they're not bad. But in aggregate, when we have systems that are designed to extract our personal information in order to try to pick make the best bets on us, right? Advertising is like gambling as far as the advertisers are concerned. They're making bets on us. It's a little
Mhm.
bit like virtual Vegas, that we're the chips and the advertisers are betting on us to do things. And that's a very corrupting system overall. It forces the wrong outcomes for what we really want socially, for it to be the world that we want to build. So I really hope that whatever we do, we figure out monetization models that don't rely on advertising. The companies that I trust more are the ones that build products that we either buy or we don't buy, based on the quality of the product, and not on some artificially low price that happens to be potentially subsidized by advertising. Um, in fact, it is one of the reasons that I went to Apple. I can't talk about what I worked on so much, but I can say why I went there was because it was right after the San Bernardino case where Apple was, right starting to stand up for privacy and saying, no, we're not going to compromise our operating system. I said, that's a company I could work for,
Hmm.
because they think they get it. I think they get privacy, and that was very important to me because I want to help build this world. The only way to really say what the future is going to be is to jump in and try to help build it, and so I have done my best to try to make sure that yes, hopefully in the future we will have the right hardware and hopefully we'll have the right infrastructure and systems in place for the best outcomes to happen and not the worst. And the worst can be pretty bad. The worst can be basically virtual enslavement, where our devices are controlling what we see and implicitly controlling what we do, and we lose our freedom of thought. We lose our freedom to have our political views in whatever spectrums we want them to be. So there's a real danger there, and because this technology is so much more powerful than television or the internet has been, I'd say it's another 10x more powerful. The danger is also magnified um, when things go wrong.
I love what you're saying there. It reminds me of the quote. I forget who said it, but the best way to predict the future is to invent it. I feel like that was maybe Steve Jobs. I could be
I
wrong on
think it
that
was.
one.
I think it might be Alan Kay actually,
I think you're right.
if I remember right.
I think you're
Yeah.
right. Let's turn to VR a little bit because that is where people think more of the metaverse. And I know people try and connect AR and VR, and we'll get to that topic as well. And you've got very definite ideas on whether that should be attempted, whether that is even possible. But if we talk about VR for a bit, where do you sit on how you want a metaverse to develop? We've had the web. The web was built intentionally decentralized. The web was built intentionally to reroute and to work, even if big chunks fell off, even if big chunks were corrupted, held by others. The reality is that the power principle, the Pareto principle, whatever you want to call it, has resulted in us using what a couple thousand websites, maybe individually, probably 10 to 20 that we regularly use and regularly go to, and then hundreds that we touch occasionally here and there. How do you see a metaverse evolving? And do you see the necessity to bridge worlds, bridge silos, bridge apps?
I do think that interoperability is the key idea, that the internet exists, in a, thousands, millions, hundreds of millions, maybe servers, because we have some standards of interoperability that were established early on by people who were very forward thinking in terms of how do we share bits of information? How do we share packets? How do we ask for things, and how do we put content out there? And that was a necessary component to be able to build what we call the web. And I think we do need the same thing. It's not strictly required that every website or every 3D world interoperate with every other one. We don't have to mash them up, but it is important that we can share some things between them. That there are ways of fetching content that are fairly standard. Um, how important is it that you can have an avatar that can go between worlds, or that you can take your loot from one to another? That you know, I think maybe less important for. I think for people who collect, NFTs and all that, it's probably super important. But at the end of the day, if I have my, +1 Vorpal sword from, site A, and I try to take it to site B, and it's not a magic based world, it doesn't make any sense in that world. It's just a piece of art at that point. And so the rules, aren't necessarily compatible. And there's no real incentive for the creators, the creative people that make these worlds to share, because they want to make self-contained worlds in general. It's
Mhm.
there's not a lot of reason why there's even cross-platform play, even though the players want it, and a company like Epic will help try to make it happen. That there aren't a lot of other people who say that that's actually worth it for them. They have other reasons for wanting people to come to their console and stay on their console, and not buy the other console, right? So it's difficult to say that will actually happen the way people are pushing it. That we'll have this vast interoperability. And I think the most difficult part that I have trouble with is I like spatial metaphors. I'm a very visual person, but does it really make sense to stitch all the information in the world into some 3D space, right? We had GeoCities early on with the web. It didn't make a ton of sense to try to put a 2D metaphor on the web. And I think making a 3D metaphor for the entire web also, it's way more than three-dimensional. That's the problem. It's very large dimensional. And so links make sense, searching makes sense, and using search engines makes sense to find things. That's why we outgrew portals and all rely on search engines at this point to find things, because there's just too many dimensions to be walking around. Where spatial metaphors do help is when you want to find things in your house, like having this idea of a mind palace where you're able to put things and know where they are and find them again. That's useful. We've evolved to do that, but that's for a limited space. That's our personal space. So I'm imagining that could be 3D, but I don't know that the entire universe needs to get stitched into a common metaphor. If someone wants to try it, more power to them. I don't think it's required. I used to do it. That was my big mistake in 1992, was thinking that was what was the internet needed. And I thought that all the way up to maybe 1998, when it's like, okay, I guess the internet doesn't really need that. It's doing just fine without it. I was wrong. Um, and even Google Earth, when we started that around 1999, wasn't meant to be the one metaphor for everybody. It was meant to more be like, okay, this is how we can stitch Earth content together. This is how we take stuff about the planet and build what we would call a trellis that you can hang your information on. Now that makes sense. If it's geospatial information, it makes sense now to connect it spatially, because they has some spatial relationships. But even then, there's lots of semantic relationships that don't make sense. Like, the idea that there could be a million instances of a can of soda, they're all semantically linked to the company that made them and the concept of soda, and maybe some health sites about the good and bad of it. But the location of the can is one more piece of information. So you could stitch the location together spatially. The other information exists on another dimension. It's not spatial. It doesn't matter where the headquarters of the company is that much for your conversation about whether you should drink soda, right? That's only minimally relevant.
It reminds me of an article I just read the other day, trying to apply our old school metaphors to modern computing, and professors in universities having real issues with people not being able to find files because professors have operated on, it's probably you, maybe me as well. I've got folders. I put other
Yeah.
folders inside those. I put files inside those. I organize them, right? And they've got people coming in, kids coming in who are like, I just search for everything. Right?
Yeah.
I don't organize. I use search. Let's go to marrying AR and VR. You wrote on Medium recently, and you've got a strong point of view there, which I think makes a ton of sense, actually, that it's stupid. That's an insane thing to try and do, to marry AR and VR. There's a sense in which I have thought is that AR is painting some of the pixels of my visual field. VR is painting all of them, and it's just a matter of progression. We could argue that, but your opinion is very, very different. This episode of TechFirst is sponsored by my creator coin, Dollar Smart. Don't think of it like Bitcoin, think of it like a backstage pass at a concert. Get some at rally.io/creator/SMRT to pitch me on podcast guests, earn weekly rewards, get social amplification, and get or give feedback on strategy and plans.
Yeah, and just to clarify though, I do think we will have devices that do both. The same device will do both AR and VR. So in that sense, there's convergence and a marrying of the devices. And I also think there's a spectrum that you could imagine going, between AR and VR on those devices and landing somewhere in the middle. I guess the way I would put it though is, as soon as you've added enough stuff to reality that you're taken out of your presence in reality. Like right now, we're both present in reality. We're paying attention to each other, but we're also aware of our physical surroundings. And if anything were to happen, we would deal with it. But to the extent that the virtual starts to take over, then we're really in VR, right? As soon as we lose a sense of where we are in the world, we're really in VR, and that transition can happen very quickly. And we can also go back and forth. I can go from focusing 100% on you, which is essentially VR right now, because I'm in the world with you. It's not my current location. Or I can look around and say, okay, I'm actually still in my office, and I'm here, and I can ping pong back and forth really quickly. My main point is that the types of experiences are very different. Where you're in a VR experience, a lot of the point is to be immersed somewhere else. It may be somewhere realistic. It might be Google Earth VR is great. I love that, and love to go travel. And I wish the data were better down at street level, that we could probably collect better, higher resolution data to walk down the streets too. But it's still really cool to fly around. Okay, so that's really very realistic. but it's still a virtual world because we're going somewhere that we're not in reality. And maybe the reason you're going to do that is because maybe we can't travel. Maybe it's due to the pandemic or cost or inaccessibility. But that's a cool thing to do, and it can be a completely fictional world as well, and that's also super fun. But how much of our time are we really going to spend doing that? Unless that's our job, you know, even if I said we're going to spend 10% of our time in VR, that might even be stretching it for most people,
Yes.
right? It might only be 1% of our time spent in VR. Apart from maybe say meetings that might happen, we might have a virtual meeting in which we both feel like we're in some neutral location, but so that's VR. Maybe that counts as more time, and business meetings might count. So maybe some of us will spend up to a third of our day in those kinds of meetings, technically VR. But you know, think of the proportions of VR as being like how much time do you spend currently watching movies and playing games? That will translate in the future to approximately how much time you might spend in VR. And if you have kids, maybe that's in favor of stuff they do, not as much the stuff the adults might want to do themselves. Whereas AR is going to be, all the time. It's going to be 18 hours a day of wearing some convenient AR device, whether it's glasses or maybe at some point in the future it's contact lenses or some advanced technology we can't even imagine that gets the information to us without having to wear stuff on our face. It's not ideal. Nobody really wants to wear glasses or contact lenses, I think. But it's ubiquitous, right? It's our interface to future computers. It's our interface to future internet. It's our interface to IoT. It's our way of connecting with people in holographic telepresence, as I like to call it, so that it feels like somebody we're talking to is just right there with us whenever we want them, synchronously or asynchronously. I mean, that's where we're going to spend all of our time, I think, and that's where it needs to be subtle and comfortable and sensitive to all different kinds of people and cultures, and not prescriptive, written from the point of view of various white male authors in the 90s who had their particular views of things. I think we need to be a lot more open and inclusive about the design of it because it will affect everybody.
It is a wonderful, amazing, crazy future that we're hurtling towards, and we get some senses of it, of what that might look like just in my own home, where my wife, my kids might have their headphones on, noise canceling. You say something, nobody hears you, right? Own worlds, even though there's not VR. And
Yeah.
yet, as you said, the devices we have today, are you going to be in them for a long time? 1%, 3%? We just aren't. I have an Oculus Quest 2. To be 100% honest, I barely use it. I just charged it yesterday. I want to use it today because I want to use it. But it's not something that you can just pick up and boom, you're in, like a smartphone, right? You have to prepare. You might have to make a space. You have to put something on your head. You have to turn it on. You have to put some things on your hands. You have to enter. There's startup costs there. It's a really, really challenging thing. I think we'll eventually have artificial eyeballs, right? And we'll just get stuff beamed right in. And the compute power for that is insane, because if we inhabit a virtual space because we're having a conversation, I need to see you in my context, maybe sitting in a chair, whatever. You need to see me in your context, and maybe there's
Hmm.
no chairs in your context, even though I'm sitting. And so, there's some real significant horsepower that's going to be required, and an AR cloud that really understands how to do things, even to enable that level of VR, correct?
Hmm. Absolutely. I think that's where, I'm glad you said that because I think that's where a lot of people go wrong is that they think if they project the VR today, they kind of say, well, okay, we're just gonna meet in a conference room. Boring. Like that's what we do now, and we hate it. Why are we going to recreate that virtually and just meet in a gray conference room with whiteboards? Like, can't we do better once we virtualize the whole situation? Like, seriously. I mean, what I would pick, the top of the Eiffel Tower for a meeting. And I would be drawing in 3D if it were up to me, or the moon, or Mars, or wherever. I mean, there's way better ways to imagine what we could be doing together. But I think you're exactly right about this idea that most of the time it's going to be that you pop into my space to ask me a question if we're working together, and I pop into your space to ask you a question. Sometimes it'll even be asynchronous, like texting. Maybe you're not even really there. I'm just getting a note from you that I can respond to later, so you don't interrupt me in the middle of what I'm doing. And that level of politeness needs to come back into our interactions, right? So, Yes, I agree totally, and I think that suggests more of what you were saying earlier about this idea that it's a little bit more of a consensual illusion. It's an illusion that is just enough. It's just the necessary bits to make it work. It's not oppressive. It's not overwhelming. If we need to bring in that virtual chair so it makes sense that you're in a seated posture but you're not hovering, you know, like you had magical powers, then bring in the chair, right? Or figure out a way to map you onto the existing chair, but then we have to figure out how to bend your neck so that you're looking at me when you mean to look at me instead of looking in the wrong direction. So it gets really complicated, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about how to solve a lot of those little weird little problems like that. Um, but they are super important, and it's got to be casual. It's got to be something that just we can just pop in and out of, like texting is today. It's very casual. You text somebody when you want to. There's not pressure to
Mhm.
respond right away. That becomes, I think, something that we will lose initially in VR, because everything's going to be about, you may send me a text and it'll be, hey, join me in VR, and then I'll join you. And then why didn't we just have the texting equivalent for this thing? Why didn't we figure out a way to do this asynchronously, right?
I will
Um,
have
it,
I will have admin privileges to your reality space, so then I will just appear in your visual field and demand your attention, no matter which way you turn your head.
yes, if you were my boss, you might get away with that, but most people wouldn't.
No.
But that, we have to design those things thoughtfully so that I think the most important thing is to help people actually focus on what they're trying to do. If somebody's focusing on document, let's not interrupt them.
Mhm.
And this I think gets to my main critique of the way a lot of people are talking about the so-called metaverse is they just picture these worlds around us, and really the computer's got to be smart about what do we want to do, like what's our intent, what are we trying to do, what's our personal context. And that's scary in some sense, because there's certain companies I don't want to give that information to. I will, I've got Facebook blocked at the firewall level at my house. Like nobody in my house runs it. So, because I know they'll try to sneak in once in a while and check status of people. So I'm like, no, no, no Facebook. So, you know, it's got to be companies that we trust, and hopefully there's more than one in the future that even talks about this stuff. That I think companies will be competing on how private they can be, and truly, that we can count on it, to be, that information is so personal to us. It's like health information,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Um, and one of the other articles that you may not have read is about all about eye tracking, and it's about, this is health information. You can use eye tracking data to determine your
Mhm.
health in certain dimensions. We don't want that information going up to some cloud in a way that it's going to be stored forever and we don't know what happened to it. We want that, if it's stored at all, to only remain on our personal devices, which can then make the decisions about what do we need to see in order to achieve our goals. That's the only way I can see it happening, and not trusting some third party to make those decisions for us. I think it's got to be so close to home that it is really just our device that knows this.
Avi, let's get a little personal as we draw to a close here. You've had a crazy, amazing career. What's been the line drawn through all of that? And talk about what's driven you to continue to want to contribute in the area of metaverse and realities and augmented reality.
Uh, Partly what we said before with the quote about, if you're going to build the future, you have to jump in and try to do your best. I think I certainly not perfect. I made mistakes myself, but I am trying to do my best to build the future that I want my kids to have. It's taken a whole lifetime to get to this point. I think the first true AR demo was in 1968, which was the year I was born. And so now 53 years later, we almost have glasses that we can use, right? It takes a while, and you got to be patient with these things because we got to get it right, and
Mhm.
that's what I feel like my job is to help get it right. But in terms of my motivation, well, the reason I got into this in the first place is I wanted to do fun stuff. I wanted to make movies and tell stories. And the tools were so bad that I'm like, okay, I got to go start building the tools. And the hardware's so bad. Okay, I got to go start building the hardware. And hopefully at some point I get to actually go start telling stories again. When all this stuff gets good enough, I will finish off whatever time I have left, just having fun and telling stories. But for now, there's a lot of important work to do, and it's not done. Spending my days advising companies and consulting and talking to a lot of people about what the future should be, to try to share what I've learned so that it all hopefully turns out right, and hopefully offsetting the people who don't think about it. There's a lot of people who just rush in and say there's money to be made, and so let's just do it and see what happens. And I'm like, well,
Move
let's
fast
think
and
about this
break
stuff.
things.
Exactly, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for this time. Do appreciate it.